Welcome. Thanks for coming along to listen to me prattle on a Saturday morning. I hope you get a lot out of today, and I hope you enjoy what you learn. Thanks for the introduction, Deandra. I just want to fill out a little bit more about what I do. I run a counselling and coaching practice, and I've got 3 offices across Sydney. And the emphasis that we use is on positive psychology. And I'm going to go a lot into what that means throughout the course of this presentation. And explain how shifting the way you think a little bit toward a positive psychology framework can really provide massive dividends in very simple things, from just being more happy and satisfied throughout the course of the day, right through to overcoming major challenges. For the moment, though, I do want to just do a little bit of housekeeping. Everybody, if they have any questions, feel free to interrupt at any time. Deandra is going to field the questions, and I'll answer any that I can. I'm happy to be interrupted at any time, because what I really want to do is make sure that everything that I speak about you can follow and you can understand. I don't want to just bombard you with too much information. On top of that, I always over-engineer my presentation, so there's a ton of material in this, and you'll be able to download it from my website later today once I upload it after the presentation. And again, if you have any questions after the presentation, I'm more happy to take your questions. Now, let me just get my presentation up. I've just got to pull up my PowerPoint, and then we can get into it.
Just so everyone knows, if you are asking questions, we'll just use your first name, so everything will be private. So if this does, go out into a recording, into a public domain, none of your personal details will be revealed. So feel free to ask some questions if you'd like.
Okay, so here we go. Just sharing my screen. Up we go. Get the slide presentation going.
We did have a question that came through right away. Just the difference between counseling, coaching, and facilitating.
That's a really good question. The more and more we get into it, there's probably not a lot of difference in terms of skill set, but in terms of emphasis, there's a lot. So facilitating, you're trying to get the best out of a group of people, and that takes a certain level of skill in presenting, connecting with people, getting them to be able to tap into their own resources and explore and develop them. Counselling tends to be focused on mental health issues like stress, anxiety, depression, even personality disorders like bipolar, borderline personality disorder. And coaching is very specific and focused. So it's a topic-based approach where we look at how to present yourself more confidently in a room, how to connect with intimate partners if you want, how to be able to influence a group if it's a corporate or a business coaching sort of vibe. Does that sort of answer the question?
Certainly did for me.
All right. Okay, so let me just sort of dive in. And again, please don't hesitate to ask any questions as we go through. Okay, so today we're going to talk about strategies for wellbeing using a positive psych framework. That's just a bit of blurb about me. I have been studying and working in the mental health industry for about 20 years. Prior to that, I was a chiropractor, and prior to that, I lectured in health sciences at Macquarie University and also the College of Chiropractic at Macquarie University. And I've just always been fascinated by the relationship between human well-being and performance and happiness and fulfillment. Along the way, I've learned a lot, and there's a lot of really cool material out there that is available to you today if you want it. The hard part is knowing where to look and what to look for. And that's where people like myself come in. We can point you in the right direction. So today's topic is going to be about an introduction to positive psychology, an introduction to the psychology of wellness and fulfillment, because there is psychology behind wellness. And yes, that eternal question about fulfillment and the meaning of life, we've got a lot of really good answers to that nowadays. It isn't a black box of vague nebulous ideas. We have some really solid explanations for what fulfillment is, and I'm going to introduce you to some of that today. And we're going to do a deep dive into an introduction into stress and anxiety and what it is and how to get rid of those things so you can be more happy and more fulfilled. Let me ask some questions about you guys. Who are you? What are you interested in? What do you want to learn today? So I'll throw it over to you, and let's see some of your questions as now, if you have any.
And for those that have just joined, just so you know, down at the bottom you'll see a little Q&A section where you can type in any questions or comments if you'd like.
All right. So do we have any questions coming in, Deandra? Because I can't see my.
Oh, here we go. So Alex has asked, he's an academic and he's finding it difficult to manage his work-related stress. And I think there's going to be a lot of those in the room today. Okay,
well, we'll talk about that probably about the halfway mark in the presentation, because that is a very, very common dilemma, the problem of overwhelm. And there are some things that you must do if you want to prevent overwhelm and obviously then burnout. Any other questions, guys?
Me personally, I think, and there's a lot of us that connect with that kind of the fulfillment area of, realizing how, what you're doing in your personal or your work life can leave you feeling fulfilled, and that bigger why is kind of something that I struggle with sometimes, and not getting caught in the monotony of the day-to-day.
Yeah, and learning the difference between the now and the future and the present and the past is key in learning how to get that mental focus right when it comes to the question of fulfillment. Let's just sort of kick on. So today, in more detail, we're going to do what's positive psychology and why is it different, what's wellness, what's fulfillment, what's stress, what's anxiety, and how to get rid of them. All right, so positive psychology is a branch of psychology that works to empower people to feel optimistic and teach them how to get the most out of themselves so they can master the challenges of life. Now, what's really interesting is it's very similar to regular psychology, but the emphasis is different. The emphasis is on teaching people how to maximize satisfaction. Now, I'm going to explain why that's important in a second. Let's just sort of keep going. I do want to make a distinction between traditional approaches to psychology and more contemporary approaches. So traditional approaches in psychology were based on a medicalized model, which was focused on the idea that you had disease of the mind. And a lot of early medicine, not so much now, but a lot of early medicine was focused on symptom management. So it wasn't focused on maximizing health and well-being. It was really focused on managing the symptoms of illness so you can sort of manage along. Now, there's still a very important case for that in the modern context, but for the vast majority of people, it's actually a bit, in my opinion, and I'm sure people will disagree with me, but in my opinion, it's a bit of a, it causes a bit of a drag on success. Whereas a more contemporary approach to psychology, as introduced by Martin Seligman, has shown that if you teach people how to maximize their fulfillment power, their ability to get the most out of their day, their week, their months, their years, they get over their stress, anxiety, depression, gambling, their addictions at more than double the rate. Now, I just want to make a caveat here. There are plenty of circumstances where this doesn't apply. If there are serious trauma, serious complications, or complex situations, then this model doesn't hold. But in the vast majority of people, probably 75% of the population, the idea of teaching people to get more by being more effective at solving the challenges and puzzles of life is far more effective. It's about twice as effective as trying to manage, say, the symptom of stress or the symptom of anxiety. It doesn't mean we ignore those signs and symptoms, but we plop them into the context of a forward-looking positive psych framework. This picture really is of the granddaddy of positive psychology, Martin Seligman. He was the head of the APA in the United States for 9 years. So that's the American Psychology Association. So a very, very eminent psychologist. And he was gifted $20 million to research whatever he wanted. And he initially researched happiness and its causes. And he found an interesting phenomenon. Some of us just can't be happy because our circumstances don't allow it. Or some of us can't be happy in the meantime, but in the future perhaps. So the idea, the goal of psychology was to help make people happy wasn't quite true. So then Seligman started to explore the world of well-being, a broader idea that allows people to be both up sometimes and down sometimes, and that's still part of a healthy context. That's when he started to broaden his ideas, and he started to discover a whole lot of really, really interesting and very powerful psychological principles. He wrote the book Flourish and the Hope Circuit, and if you want to learn more about those, just simply look them up online, get some samples and read them. They're excellent books, and you can buy them if you like, and I highly recommend you do. I want to point out down here something very interesting, and I've just got to turn that off. People, when you've got $20 million to throw around, you can do massive studies, and you can do them over very long periods of time. And Seligman discovered that people that had previously been diagnosed with stress, anxiety, depression, gambling addiction, etc., drug addiction, were getting better on a positive psych framework program than they were on previous, more traditional symptom management models. And that raises a really interesting question. Why is teaching somebody how to get over, why does teaching somebody to be more empowered in their life and living help them get over really serious mental conditions? And that's a question to you guys. What do you think the answer is before we move on? And I'll give you a few minutes to think about it. What is it about teaching people to be more empowered that helps them overcome anxieties, stresses, gambling addictions, even though you're not treating them for that problem? I'll leave that over to you guys. I want you to see if you can answer that. Are you getting any questions?
We have a question, but not answer to your question.
All right, we'll go.
What's
the question?
The question, oh, sorry, we did have one come in. Gina said, give them confidence in themselves to change their habits.
Yep, absolutely. So confidence is a key part of positive psychology. People who are more confident are more optimistic and more resilient, and therefore they're more creative in their solutions. But there's more to it. Any other questions or answers to the question of why does teaching somebody to be more effective in life and living help them overcome, symptoms like stress, anxiety, and depression when they're not being treated for those conditions?
And this question kind of falls into this. It's an interesting one. What the best tools to recover from a narcissistic relationship? So maybe not necessarily narcissism and getting over that, but then again, making them feel empowered.
Totally, yes. Narcissists can absolutely ruin a person's confidence. they can drive a person into absolute misery. So yes, depending on the severity, if it's a very severe case of trauma caused by the narcissist, then it's back to basics. It's building your confidence in just to your day-to-day living. But then over time, we want you to start to be able to see that you're still able to get what you want out of relationships. But you might have to learn a few new tricks, like learning how to screen people better, more effectively, learn how to understand and recognize harmful personality types, and so that you are more equipped to go out into the world of dating and relating without the fear of getting trapped again. That was a very good question, by the way.
And someone else has
any other questions?
Yes, someone else has answered yours. Increasing coping skills, and I think that kind of hits it on the head.
Totally. That's probably in the most succinct and simplest way to understand it. What we think happens is that people who are struggling with stress, anxiety, depression don't have the coping skills. People who are doing drugs and alcohol are probably using drugs and alcohol to cope. But teaching people how to maximize their coping mechanisms certainly means you don't get anxious, you don't get stressed, you don't get depressed. You don't need the drugs or the alcohol. So we think that stress, anxiety, depression in the positive framework and drugs and alcohol. Drugs and alcohol are a distraction strategy. Haven't always be stimulated as a distraction strategy because they haven't mastered the craft of being satisfied and fulfilled in the absence of those things. The second thing with stress, anxiety, and depression, they are more a consequence of not having a positive view of the future. So we know that depression is a sense of hopelessness. We know that anxiety is fear that things will go wrong. And if you teach people how to put hope into their future and empower them to overcome their fears and phobias, then they don't need to get anxious. They won't get depressed. This slide highlights the framework that Seligman decided was the best framework to explain positive psychology. It's the PERMA model, and it's basically referring to positive emotions, positive engagement, positive relationships, meaning, and positive accomplishments. Does anybody have any questions about those 5 categories? What they mean? Because there's a lot of things that need to be learned to create positive emotions, to create positive engagements, to create positive relationships. Before I move on, does anybody have any questions about that?
None that have come up yet.
Okay. Again, if any questions come up, just put your hand up and happy to answer them. So, summary of wellbeing and positive psychology. Wellbeing is a state of optimal health that occurs when physical, psychological, and social conditions for optimal health are met. So, what it's saying is that if you meet the conditions for health and well-being, then the person will thrive. As opposed to going into their personality and saying, well, you've got a tendency to be angry. Let's focus on that. What this does, this model focuses on, is first creating the conditions that should create optimal health and well-being. And then what we find is that a great deal of the anger, the stress, the frustrations, resentments go away. And then if there's anything else left after that, then you can address those more specifically. Why? Because the research shows that there's a strong relationship between mental, emotional, physical health and positive social engagement and well-being. And I mean, it doesn't sound that surprising, does it? Really. It only took us 2,000 years of civilization and, 10,000 years of civilization and 70 years of research to prove what we all probably could guess at. Here's the important thing though. Taking a positive engagement or positive approach to engagement to relationships and meaning and achievement helps you get the balance, purpose, direction right. It will maximize your feeling of well-being. Now, I want to emphasize that well-being is as much a question of feeling well as it is a question of being well, all right? So it's all great to have a fit and healthy mind and body, but if you feel terrible because you're over-exercising, you're over-sacrificing, then what's the good of it? So I want to just reiterate, it's about creating the conditions for well-being, but it's also about feeling positive as well. Now let's just move a little bit further down the track. So we know the obvious stuff. It's this positive psychology stuff. It's easy to comprehend and understand. The hard part is the doing. And this is where the rubber hits the road, where the theory hits the reality. The biggest problem in life is that we have loads of temptations, distractions, and setbacks. There's a person in this room who is not going to have serious setbacks in their life. And part of the positive psych framework is to assume that serious setbacks are normal and you have the resources to overcome them. Obviously, there are cases where that isn't true in serious trauma, death, critical accidents. However, for the majority of the cases that you're presented with, people have gone before you who've had the problems that you've had. They've overcome them, and you can too. So the key here is to not try to avoid them. Don't bring them on, but to focus on the truth that you can overcome them when they come, when they happen. Now, what I want to sort of emphasize here is that it's all well and good to have this theory, but the key is motivation and mind skill. Motivation and mind skill are the key. No amount of knowing the right stuff, having the right skills will matter if you aren't convinced that pursuing a positive psych framework or pursuing your health and well-being is worth the effort. You've got to be utterly convinced that it's worth the effort, and then you'll find the motivation to do what has to be done, to train your mind to focus on the skills, to accept what you can't change and influence what you can, to detach from negative intrusive thoughts, to visualize daily your own success, no matter how well you feel. If you don't have the motivation, you just won't do that. So it's very important to find the motivation. Now, I haven't really got time to go into that here, but the key to success with motivation is to look at the costs if you do, the costs if you don't, the benefits if you do, and the benefits if you don't. And it isn't just about a single exercise in doing a cost benefits analysis. It's about over time repeating that exercise until you are utterly convinced that it's better for you. All right, now what I want to do is introduce you to this idea of fulfillment psychology. At the beginning of the presentation, I suggested that we've got answers to this great eternal question that mankind, humankind, womankind have been pursuing all their history, the meaning of life. And I actually have some ideas about that if you want to ask me about the meaning of life later. But this idea that fulfillment is a really good meaning to pursue. And we know an enormous amount about what makes humans feel fulfilled. before you can answer fulfillment and how to get it, you've got to know what it is. Fulfillment is the understanding and satisfaction of your core needs and wants. The hard part that most people struggle with is the difference between immediate gratification and fulfillment. The easiest way to explain it is fulfillment improves both your short-term and your long-term satisfaction in life. And instant gratification simply makes you feel good now. So the beer, the pizza, the chocolate cake is good now. But does eating beer, pizza and chocolate cake sustain your satisfaction over the course of the day, the week, the months, and the years? And that's the difference between fulfillment. And the key to understanding fulfillment is that for all humans, there is a very predictable set of attributes and criteria that we all share that are our core of fulfillment. And if you can identify and if you can satisfy those, then you will feel fulfilled, feel more empowered, etc. So let me just show you that list. I think I've got it here. Okay, so how do you achieve maximum fulfillment, satisfy your core needs and wants? Core needs and wants are the needs and wants that support flourishing and thriving. So imagine you've got a garden and you want it to flourish and thrive. Well, it's no good just pruning and weeding. You've got to satisfy its core needs and wants. So yes, you do have to do some pruning and weeding. However, you've got to address the levels of water, sunlight, nutrients, bacteria in the soil, and also the levels of CO2 in the air, and CO and nitrogen in the soil. If you do that and you do it in the right proportion, you get a flourishing and thriving garden. It's the same with humans. There are certain things that we need to have happen, we need to participate in for us to flourish and thrive. And here's a summary of those. This is not all encompassing, but it gives you a very, very good idea. At the top, we have needs, and at the bottom, we have wants and aspirations. Needs are must-have. And that's really the top two: survival and security needs, food, water, clothing, shelter, safety, certainty, predictability, reliability. Those sustain life and living. Then we've got what we call the socio-emotional needs or wants. Some people say that these are not needs, but I say that if you want to be a happy, satisfied, fulfilled person, you need both the ability to manage and regulate your emotions and belong to a community, to engage with that community, so you get the benefits of participating and giving and receiving love and affection from other people. And that's pretty hard to do if you don't meet those criteria. Now, these ones here are ones that most give, probably up until the end of the Second World War, gave people the most purpose, meaning, and direction. Get a job, get married, have children, belong to a community, die happy. These others, the individual identity and purpose, meaning, direction, and self-expression needs and wants, really, they were always available to humankind, but they've become much more important since the end of the Second World War, where we saw an explosion in the free market economy and the explosion of opportunities for the individual first. And second, pre-war, people may have spent their whole lives establishing this and maintaining it, and a little bit of thought to a sense of self-expression and a center of control, but a majority of people's efforts were put into these areas here. Post-war, because of this explosion in individuality and wealth and opportunity, these individual identity needs and wants became far, far more prominent and far, far, far more important. For the average 20-something, most of these are already taken care of by the time they're 25. So the question then becomes, what next? And what we know from the psychology is that the way you answer the what next in your life will heavily impact whether you get stress, anxiety, or depression. What I want you to do right now is just have a look at this table and score yourself on what that those criterias, look at each of those categories and give your score out of 10 as to whether or not you're doing well in those spaces. Now, isn't it a case that you need 10 out of 10 to feel satisfied? It is a case that you probably need 6.5 out of 10 and above in most of those criteria. What's really interesting is that this simple table also tells you where you need to start to focus your efforts if you want to get more satisfaction and fulfillment. So just take a few minutes to look at that and see how you're doing. And if anybody has any questions, just put their hand up. I'll give you a couple of minutes of time to think about each of those categories, get your head around them, and give yourself a score. Okay, so just take your time. Do we have any questions? Just give you another couple of minutes to think about that and start asking some questions.
I have a question that has come up a lot in friends and myself, where we have this concept that you need to work in your why. So you have to have a job that gives you purpose and fulfillment, and you feel like you're accomplishing that bigger goal by doing that. It's personally something I've felt, and a lot of my friends feel. I saw an interesting article in Maclean's in Canada that actually broke that down and compared it against actually finding the creativity, finding some purpose, finding the care and contribution, not necessarily in work, but just generally in life. And that if you had a 9 to 5, that was just, you go, you show up, you work, but that you could find that in your family or your in other parts of your life, that it was equally as fulfilling. Do you have any comment on that?
Yeah, it's a very, very good question. The idea of what is purposeful, meaningful, and the direction you should take is different for everyone. Some people just want to get enough money in the bank to have a happy family. And their purpose, meaning, and direction is all about happy family. Some people, like our good friend Elon Musk, want to change the world and solve the world's energy crisis and save humanity and take us all to Mars. What your particular satisfaction fulfillment is, only you can know. However, a lot of us, there is a trap. A lot of us may overlook the love, care, contribution, the purpose, meaning, and direction in the day-to-day stuff when they think that they're still looking for it in some big, grand idea. So to sort of help me come to terms with that, I like to pursue a big aspiration, and which is teaching the people that I come in contact with about positive psychology. But during my day-to-day, I'm not thinking about my big grand scheme to take over the world with positive psychology and my particular version of that, which is fulfillment psychology. What I'm doing is I'm with my wife and children, I'm with my friends, I'm with my work colleagues, I'm connecting with them, I'm loving and caring for them. If I'm doing a simple presentation, I enjoy the doing of that. So what to I think answer the question is, you can find purpose, meaning, and fulfillment and satisfaction anywhere, but you've got to look for it, and you've got to intend to look for it. And you can find it in grand ideas and small ideas alike. Years ago, I studied meditation with a yoga teacher, and he said a really funny thing, and I love it, that you know you've reached fulfillment when you can laugh at a leaf falling off a tree. I want you to think about that. I know that sounds kind of weird, but it actually goes right to the heart of the matter. You're fulfilled where you can find joy in simple stuff, as well as excitement in the big stuff. I think, does that sort of answer the question, Jandra?
Definitely, thank you for that.
Sorry about the background noise. That was just my daughter going to the bathroom.
No problem.
All right, so any questions before I move on?
No question.
All right, let's keep going. All right, why bother improving your fulfillment scores? Well, it feels better, and so you can thrive and flourish. Now, I'm just going to whiz through. I want to get to stress, anxiety, depression. I know that there's a lot in these slides, and you can download them from my website, or you can keep this, recording for your own reference later. But at the end of the day, what I want you to do is I want you to go and get the idea that to get successful satisfaction, fulfillment, and to overcome stress, anxiety, you need a regime change. If you keep doing what you've already done, you won't get any change. So we need to start today to focus on improving your mental, emotional, physical well-being every day. And it doesn't have to be a great grand experience where you suddenly go out and buy tons of active wear, get all the videos, and put a running machine in your living room. It is mostly about little changes in your brain and your mind, about your attitudes towards your own health, well-being, mental and emotional, physical satisfaction. What I want to do now is just dive straight into the two biggest obstacles to satisfaction and fulfillment. There are plenty of obstacles. There are critical events, catastrophes, deaths, diseases, accidents, injuries. There's a whole bunch of things we could talk about that are obstacles to satisfaction and fulfillment. What I want to focus on now for the rest of the presentation is stress and anxiety. I want to explain what they are and how to get rid of them or manage them or reduce them greatly. So what's stress? Any ideas? Does anybody have any idea what stress is? That's a question. I'll throw it over to you. Any answers? Anything coming through, Deanna?
Not yet, but I know it takes a little time to type.
I want you to think about, what is stress? Is it really a bad thing?
So someone said the inability to cope with something that kind of comes your way.
Yeah, that is a type of stress. That's overwhelm. And it's the most common explanation we have for stress. I want you to look at this. This down here. Stress is that which causes us to adapt. Now, let's understand that if you, for example, don't have enough stress, you're understimulated. If you have too much stress, you're overwhelmed. And the key is to get the balance right with just the right amount of stress thriving. So if you look at the idea of exercise, if you don't exercise, you get stiff, you get sore, your muscles shorten, your ligaments weaken, your ability to cope with physical stress, and for that matter, mental emotional stress, goes down if you don't exercise. Now, we know that if you exercise, and there's basically, the formula is 30 minutes per day, at least 5 days a week for maximum benefit. And that needs to include aerobic, flexibility, and muscle development. If you do that 30 minutes a day, your body will get stronger each day. However, if you're a bit of a gym junkie and a bit of a bit aggressive in your training, you could easily over stress your body. In other words, take your body beyond its ability to adapt. And so you get muscle tears, muscle strains, ligament strains. You could, in serious cases, cause a heart attack. And we know there are plenty of examples around the world. You hear of people going in marathon runs on a hot day. Their body's unable to cope with the heat load, and they start to cause serious muscle damage. That's overwhelm. Now, I want to take the same analogy into the space of mental and emotional stress. So we've got eustress is boredom, which is all about a lack of motivation, really. Most people aren't lazy. They just tend to have, in those down spaces, they tend to just have an absence of exciting motivations and ideas. Too much stress is overwhelm. Overwhelm is what happens when you exceed your body's ability to adapt and repair. Optimal stress, not too little, not too much, just the right amount of stress. And that looks like this. This is called a Kamen curve. And we know that on this, oh gosh, I forgot to put in the axis table there. This is performance. We know that if you have too little stress, you won't perform at your best. If you have too much stress, you won't perform at your best. You'll break down. And we want you to get into the flow zone, or the peak stress, which is that balance where your mind and body is stimulated enough to be active and engaged, but not so stimulated or enough to cause you to break down and perform poorly. So that's a summary of what stress is. In humans, the biggest cause of stress is mental stress. And the biggest cause of mental stress is worry and rumination. Worry is strong thinking that causes distress. Rumination is a particularly nasty form of worry, which is going over and over a problem, never resolving it, and only upsetting yourself in the process. Never reaching a conclusion or a decision. So you get into these, what we call endless loop worry cycles. Then there's another form of rumination, which is the endless option cycle, where you go down a rabbit hole, and for every rabbit hole you go into, there's another 2 or 3 options to go into, and they're all very dark. Now, what's interesting, most worry is habitual, and I'll come back to that in a minute. Anxiety isn't worry. Anxiety is fear that causes dysfunction. Now, I want to make a really important distinction here. Anxiety isn't just fear. Fear is fear, and fear is useful. Fear stops us doing dumb, dangerous things. For example, vertigo stops us from going close to the edge of high places so we don't fall off. Fear of the dark stops us trying to walk down dark alleys or blundering through a dark space and falling down an unseen hole or being attacked by wild animals, let alone wild bandits. So fear is good. It's there for a reason. It's to protect you. Anxiety is fear that causes you to operate in a dysfunctional way. So I want you to get your head around that. Just take a second now to think about worry and anxiety. Think about, do you have any serious worries that you go over habitually? Do you have any serious fears that are causing you to be unable to function well in life? That's a question to put to you. So, do you have any serious worries that you habitually go over? Or do you have any fears that are causing you disruption in your life? Just take a few minutes to think about that. Any ideas, any questions coming through?
So making mistakes and fearing what other people think.
Yep. It's one of the top 6 core fears of not being good enough. And it's almost like a milestone of development. Everyone has to go through that one. And if you want to be free of the worry of what other people think or of fear of mistakes, then you have to find solutions to those. And we're going to cover some of those off in the next few minutes. Any other questions or any other comments about fear or stress or worry?
Cyclical thoughts before bed impacting sleep is one.
Really, really, really common. Now, this is an interesting one. They aren't always worries. So let's say you've got a very important job to complete, and as you're going to bed, you're simply thinking about the solutions to the problems. That technically isn't worry. It's just problem solving at an inconvenient time. It's not the right thing to do because you do need your sleep. Worry would be thinking about the disaster that might happen, the upsetting parts of the problem solving exercise. So you might be going, okay, I've got to do this presentation, but what if I forget something? Oh God, then I'll look embarrassed. What if I get asked a question I can't answer? Oh my God, I'll look like a fool. As opposed to, how do I present really well tomorrow? Well, I've got to have my slides completed. Yep, I've done those. I've got to know what's in the subject matter. I reckon I've got a 75% coverage on that. That's good enough. That's problem solving. That's not worry. They can both disrupt your sleep. However, the worry component is the dark, nasty conclusions or fears or concerns that you might develop through this habit of going over and over and over things. Now, to stop that from happening, we've got to do quite a few things, and it's probably a little bit, there probably isn't quite enough time to address that one specifically. But the thumbnail strategy is you've got to convince yourself that it's useless to think about your worries before bed. Secondly, you've got to have a downtime where at about 2 hours before you're going to bed, you've got to stop all brain activities. And yes, I know that makes it difficult watch Netflix, but you probably don't want to do any violent, distressing bedtime Netflix anyway. But you get it. If you you've got to have a downtime where you allow your brain to get drowsy and you allow your brain to get ready for sleep. Then what we also do is that when you're in a when you're fully awake and you're going through your course of your day, you need to set aside time to challenge and change your thinking patterns. And that's what we're going to show you how to do in a minute.
The last one
Right.
that grew, sorry to interrupt,
Yeah.
but the worrying about procrastination that leads to dysfunction.
Yeah. Again, we've got to change your thinking, and we've got to get you to realize that procrastination is harming you, so that the more you procrastinate, the more terrible and difficult your life gets. Then we've got to look at the flip side and recognize that any small steps are an advantage. So moving forward, plus we've got to look at what are the obstacles in your thinking that are making you stuck. Is it a fear of failure? Is it a fear of not being good enough? Is it a fear of not knowing what you're doing, etc.? And then we've got to specifically address those so that you can loosen up and free up your creative juices and start throwing yourself into creation rather than procrastination. I want to just explain, we approach anxiety differently to the way we approach stress. With anxiety, you can formularize anxiety. You can say that the size of the anxiety is equal to the perceived cost multiplied by the perceived probability multiplied by your perceived ability to tolerate that cost. Notice the word perceived. That relates to the fact that being frightened of a knife-wielding psychopath is not imagined. It's real, and you should be frightened, and you should run away or pick up a big stick so you can fight them off. When it comes to anxiety, a lot of anxiety is perceived or imagined or, in some cases, created, and it's magical. It doesn't even exist. You might overestimate the probability of something. So I once had a client who was frightened of flying, and we know that the likelihood of you dying in a plane crash, especially if you get on all the big major carriers, is less than being hit by a car crossing the road. But some people perceive the probability far higher. Then the last part of the anxiety equation is the perception of tolerance. Some people perceive that they're unable to tolerate the anxiety, and so they don't want, their anxiety goes up, when in fact they're more capable and more resilient than they probably realize. Let me just sort of dive into this in a little bit of detail in a second. What I wanted to do, I want you to use this little 4-point process as a sort of an overarching strategy for attacking stress and anxiety. So we have to change your thinking. We have to change your mind practices and mindfulness skills, meditation, yoga. They have all got excellent research behind them showing that they are highly beneficial. You do need to take care of your body and your well-being, and you need to be part of a good community. It kind of sounds like Seligman's PERMA model: positive engagement, positive relationships, positive emotions, positive achievements, etc., positive meaning. Very similar. We need you to start to be ready to change your thinking, change your mind skills, take care of your body, and stay connected to good people. When it comes to changing your thinking, you need to identify the root cause of the fear or the stress. And fortunately, there isn't an endless loop of problems. There's only about 6 to 10 that manifest themselves into most of 99% of our problems. You need to change or challenge the root cause, not the superficial stuff. You could spend a lifetime chasing the symptoms of the root cause problem. But if you change the root cause of the problem, then 99% of the symptoms go away. Then you've got to learn to tolerate and accept there is no perfect solution. That's really important. You can have, in many cases, 99.9% no fear, no stress. In some cases, the best you can ever get is 75%, and you need to tolerate the rest. But tolerance and acceptance, or just sheer grit, determination, and resilience is a critical component in managing stress and anxiety. So worrying thinking habits is all about patterns of thinking about problems we have that cause stress because of their very nature. Unlike problem solving creates solutions, and those solutions make you feel more confident. Worrying thinking habits don't do the problem solving, they simply cause distress. Let's look at a few. Now I'm going to see, I can't really blow that up. Oh yeah, okay. Let's just do that. Let's just look at some of these. Okay. Black and white thinking, seeing things in black and white terms, no middle ground. Situations are either good, great, or a disaster. One's performance is either good or catastrophic. People are either good or bad. Overgeneralizing, making broad generalizations on the basis of negative behaviors. People are always terrible to me. Everyone thinks I'm stupid. Nobody likes me. This one here is a very common one. You see it in everyday life. You see it on TV. You see it in, particularly in political debate. Selective abstraction, focusing on mistakes, failures, or weaknesses, or only looking at evidence that supports your negative point of view. We see that happening in politics every day. In fact, the basis of the Westminster system is to look at the other guy, the other party, and find faults. Ignore the evidence that suggests that they might be doing a good job, and only focus on the evidence that tells us they're doing a bad job. Predicting catastrophes, expecting the worst, awfulizing, exaggerating the importance of negative events. Those are very, very common. Let's go down to a couple of others. This is one that is common, and it's a real problem. The fallacy of fairness. Life isn't supposed to be fair. There's no rule book that says it does. The principle of fairness still applies. That is, if you act fairly and right and reasonably, for the vast majority of people, they'll act fairly and reasonably back to you. So it isn't a case that you should go out and not be fair and reasonable. No, you should. It's just that even if you are fair and reasonable, you should have no expectation that people should be fair and reasonable back. Magnification, minimization, emotional reasoning, allowing your fears and worries to dictate thinking as opposed to your logic. Now, I'm aware we're running a bit late. Am I right to keep going, Jandra?
Look, I think this is such good information for those that want to stay on and have some more time. Definitely, please keep going. And if anyone does need, we're getting yeses in the chat. So if anyone needs to drop off again, this will be provided as a recording.
Okay, cool. All right. So excuse me, the short solution to these problems are you've got to figure out if you're doing them and don't do them. And specifically, there are alternative strategies that are better. So there are some things that are black and white, and there are some things that are not. That's how you address black and white thinking. Overgeneralization. You can overgeneralize in some cases and get useful information, but in many cases you need to be specific. selective abstraction. You need to look at the whole evidential field, not just the evidence that supports your argument. You see that in couples therapy, that typically one person sees it a certain way, the other person sees it their way. They look only at the evidence that supports their point of view, and then the two fight about it. So I would take the time to get familiar with these, because it's really, really easy to identify where you're going wrong, and there are really good solutions to each and every one of them. So, for example, jumping to negative conclusions. Well, okay, if you jump to a negative conclusion, one of the strategies we teach people to do is to, okay, what's opposite? If the negative is true, is the positive true also? And if it's just as true, why choose the crappy view? Okay, so you can see the way it works. Let's keep moving on. If you look at the all the anxieties people have in the world, and you go, do they break down into only a few fears and concerns? And yeah, guess what? They do. The fear of death, or its adult, more mature version, is the dread of death. Now, that causes everything from drug and gambling addiction through to hypochondriasis and excessive concern about meaning. Aloneness, the fear that you can't cope in the world unless you are connected to others. The fear that people will never get you the way you get you. Coming to terms with that is vitally important for you to be able to hold successful relationships. Fear of vulnerability. This is really easy to understand. Nobody wants to get hurt. And the fear here is that you could be hurt mentally, emotionally, physically. And that's an inchoate, an innate fear in all of us. And we need to come to terms with the fact that life is potentially painful. Powerlessness, the idea that you can't or don't have the power to achieve what you want. Meaninglessness, the idea that life is meaningless and then you die. We all have to come to terms with that and find our own meaning and our own purpose if we want to feel satisfied and fulfilled, and you can. And I think pursuing a fulfilling and meaningful life is one of the simplest and easiest ways to add to answer that one. Some people say it's all part of a greater universal idea like religion or Christianity, Buddhism, Hindu, Jewish, etc. And not being good enough is probably the most common fear that we all hold, that I'm not good enough, not smart enough, not pretty enough, I'm not wealthy enough, etc. Now, in order to be fully fulfilled and satisfied, we have to address all of these fears and worries and concerns. Now, the way you can do that is change your thinking using Socratic questioning and behavioral experiments. This is one of a dozen or more typical strategies that people, therapists use to manage and or eliminate stress and anxiety. There's another one that I'd point you at, which is called the DIRT program, Danger Ideation Reduction Therapy. It was created by Professor Ross Menzies, who took the idea that if people have hand washing fears, germ fears, and they start to wash their hands a lot to the point where their hands start to bleed and it starts to seriously disrupt their life, as in the case of OCD hand washing. If you convince them that there is no danger, then they'll stop the hand washing. So if there is no danger from germs, they'll stop doing the hand washing, and the research shows that they do. Socratic questioning, or thinking, challenging your thinking. I want you to look at these first two questions, and these two, and probably the last two. The number 8 is the most easy and simplest way to address worries. Identify the thought or perception that's worrying you, write it down. For example, I'm upset because I believe XYZ might happen. Then look at the evidence that supports your fear. And look at all the evidence that supports your fear. And if you can't find any evidence, well, then you probably are worrying about something that you shouldn't worry about. Then look at the evidence that contradicts your fear. So don't just look at the evidence that supports your fear. Look at the evidence that contradicts your fear. And if you can't find evidence that supports your fear and you find plenty of evidence to contradict your fear, then you really don't have anything else to worry about. On the other hand, if you do find lots of evidence and you can't find any evidence to contradict your fear, well, you do have something to worry about. But you'll find these two questions will eliminate probably 60% of the fears you ever, or the anxieties or the worries you might have. Look at alternative solutions. So what would happen, what other ways can I look at this? They might look at, what would I tell a friend or a colleague to help them in a situation? If you were giving helpful advice, how would you help others get over this problem? Now, this one's a really good one, and I use it all the time. Realistic, what is the worst that can happen? Can you live with it? That's the tolerance question. Can you just tolerate the problem? And if you can, just tolerate it. All right, so that's called Socratic questioning. There's heaps of variations of Socratic questioning to address everything from stress, anxiety, and depression, personality problems, etc. You can just look them up on the net, or look them up on high quality resources like Psychology Today. Sydney University's got a lot of published stuff. Pennsylvania State University, where Martin Seligman is a professor, they have plenty of material to help you challenge your thoughts. When it comes to challenging anxiety thoughts, it's a little bit different. Once you've identified the fears, then ask yourself, what would your most reasonable friend say about your fear? What would you teach them if you were trying to reassure them about their fear? Now, remember, you're not just reiterating your fear, because if you think you're frightened and telling your friend is reassuring, well, then you're wrong. What you need to do is imagine you're trying to help them and reassure them. Because what this does is a provocative exercise. It makes you challenge your own fears, and you will be surprised how often you come up with a reassuring solution. What is the likelihood that you fear will happen? Write it down. Or am I just frightened about a very unlikely event? Being killed in a car accident in modern Australia is very unlikely. When I grew up, it was probably 10 times more likely, but now it is so unlikely. It could still happen, but is it worth worrying about? What bad thing would happen if you simply left the situation and put yourself in a safer place? Maybe the fear is real and you need to just simply remove yourself. Say in the case of domestic violence, often we need to help women and children particularly escape, and that is the best solution. And as soon as they're out of their frightening and terrible situation, their fears and anxieties go away.
I was going to ask you earlier in the a way to kind of interrupt, because I think a lot of our patients and myself, even with the fear of flying, you get in those cyclical kind of dreadful places where your brain just takes over and your body's conditioning to that anxiety or repetitive kind of thought just takes over. It's almost like you're on auto program, and it seems like in this strategy,
you are on autopilot.
It kind of just intercepts and interrupts that and forces you to become logical about the potential irrational, if it is an irrational fear. And
well, even if it's real, the idea that being frightened is useful is rarely sensible. look at extreme cases, men and women on death row, they're going to die in an hour's time. Some of them are able to find peace, and some of them are terrified. What's the difference? Well, this is what they get ahead. So I still, when I fly, I flew to Canada recently, and there were occasions there we're hitting really bad turbulent weather. In fact, when we flew into Sydney, there was 30 to 60 knot crosswinds on the tarmac, and the pilot apologised at the end because we had circled Sydney for about 30 minutes, 40 minutes, and then he goes, they just landed the plane, and it was the bumpiest ride I've ever had. And I can remember saying to myself, well, it'd be kind of unfortunate to die on the tarmac, but it'll make good news. Because I go, well, I can't do anything about that. I'm locked in a can, and it might crash and it might not. Oh well. And that's learning to tolerate the distress, not trying to change the reality. Okay, now another way that we change our fears, worries, and concerns, our anxieties, is through behavioural experiments. So the essential nature of this is to challenge your fears by trying to disprove them. First of all, you've got to identify the fear or worry. I'm frightened because I'm not good enough, or I can't do X, Y, and Z. Then you've got to create an experiment that tests or challenges the fear or worry, but doesn't exacerbate it. So little steps. You don't want to be frightened of swimming, dive in the deep end only to find you can't swim, and have a terrifying experience. That's called flooding. We used to do it. 30% of people get over their fear. 70% of people get worse. So we don't want you to do experiments that are going to be so scary they're more traumatic than they are empowering. So we want you to do them in small steps and small increments and debrief the results. So you might start, if you're frightened of presenting, you might simply start by figuring out the fear. I'm frightened I might not look like an expert, that I won't have all the answers, or people won't want to engage with me. So then what you do is you go, well, the fear there is the fear that I'm not good enough. Then what we do is we reframe the fear. We go, well, it's really just a conversation, isn't it? I am just presenting information, but it just happens to be on a specific topic, and I'm just having a conversation with lovely people. So we've reframed it. Then what we do is we go practice having a conversation with our friends. And it might be having a conversation with our friends about a topic. Then what we do is we have a conversation with a group of friends, not just one friend. And when we're confident that we know what we're talking about, and we can do this because we're just having a conversation, we then go and present to our team, and then we go to present to our department, and then we present to the world. So you incrementally increase the perception of threats and risks. There are millions of behavioural experiments, and you can look up behavioural experiments for overcoming fear and anxiety or stress and worry on the internet. Again, all the good universities, all the good societies have plenty of materials that you can use to help. I want to sort of park the kind of cognitive approach. I want to introduce you to the mindfulness approach. Now, mindfulness psychology is really mind skill. The Buddhists and the Ayurvedics were right. If you have high-level mind skill, you can do unbelievable things that would make you bulletproof. If you want to see, look up Training a Shaolin Monk on YouTube, and your mind's going to be blown at what these dudes can do because they do mind skill training. I had a funny little story. I'll just go back to tell about that one. When I was studying clinical neurology at university, one of my lecturers said we had this Indian guru come in, and his name was Muktananda, and he said he could stop his heart. And we thought, no, you can't do that. I actually knew of Muktananda because my meditation teacher trained under him. Now, they got him in and they put electrodes on his brain and on his heart and on his, all the fancy electronic equipment to measure heart rate, blood pressure, brain activity. And they got him, they said, off you go, do your heart stopping thing. And my lecturer said, I couldn't believe what I saw. He lowered his heart rate so much that the doctors in the room, 2 medical doctors, GPs, could not find a pulse. But when they looked on the ECG, they could see his heart was fluttering enough to keep the blood moving enough through his body that it wouldn't coagulate, because blood, when it stops, will coagulate. And his brain activity had slowed down enormously. Now, when they looked at that, they thought, oh my God, he's effectively stopping his heart. But that's not the interesting thing. The fact that he could deliberately do that. On top of that, what we know is it's pretty much what bears do when they hibernate. They go into a hibernation state. And some research into hibernation in humans shows that if we lower our heart rate, lower our brain activity, we can tolerate cancer medication far better than we can tolerate it when we're in a wakeful and fully conscious state. Really, really interesting research in that. Now, mindfulness psychology is really about focusing your mind and detaching your mind from negative thoughts. So 2 things, attention and detachment. Let me start to round up. What this really means, if we go back to that slide about regime change, it really is about learning the daily practices of diet, rest, exercise, recovery, and health for the body, about changing your sense of optimism by adopting a framework of gratefulness. And I know that can be very challenging for some people. And certainly there's been plenty of times in my life when I felt very ungrateful. But overall, I know that the idea of gratefulness is very important. Daily practices of looking for hope. All of these are mind skills. Learn to tackle your anxieties with Socratic questioning, behavioral experiments. We didn't really go into emotional regulation. There's a whole range of skills you need to learn there. Connecting with, and if you want to find out more, I'm more than happy to explain at a later date. Connecting with people, because through social learning, social immersion, good people make us happy. And meditation, mindful practices. It doesn't sound too much, does it? It does sound structured. It does sound like you've got to invest in stuff. And the reality is, you do. But that doesn't sound too much, does it? Now, there's probably some stuff around the emotional regulation and the tackling anxieties and stresses that you might want to learn. And again, you can research your own, or you can reach out to me and I'm happy to help. But it's not too much. Okay, so at the end of the day, it's all about balance. And I'm just going to go over some readings here. So if you want to find out more, please feel free to go to Clear Day Consulting and download a free copy, which I'll be uploading onto the website later. These are some really good resources. Pennsylvania State University School of Positive Psychology, headed by Martin Seligman. There's heaps of material on there. There's surveys, there's studies that you can participate in. Sydney University School of Psychology has resources. Happiness Institute up here in Brisbane. In Sydney, they've got offices here in Sydney. Mind and Brain Institute, that tends to be a fairly technical and neuroscience-based platform, so may not be for some, but if you're like me and you love neuroscience, well, it's like having a party. The Black Dog Institute is for stress, anxiety, and depression. It's a very, very high quality, very good institute. Beyond Blue, the same. And these two books, Flourish and The Hope Circuit by Martin Seligman, I highly recommend for you. And that's it. So I'm going to hang around for a little while if you have any questions. And yeah, feel free to put your hand up now, and I'll stick around and just answer any questions. Deandra, do you have any questions?
Well, first, thank you so much for that. That was a lot of really great information that, of course, everyone is so individual here that they each have their areas of focus. And yeah, comments are coming in saying thank you. Extremely informative. I agree. One thing, just while maybe some people are asking any last minute questions for you, one thing someone told me a long time ago, and I think it's the last slide on mindfulness and meditation, and then merging what you said about taking things in increments. I think often we get overwhelmed or anxious about having to be the perfect, okay, I'm going to wake up every morning, do my hour of meditation, eat healthy, and it becomes an all or nothing approach. And someone told me a long time ago that, you know, mindfulness doesn't mean that you have to sit and and do the whole thing and say your mantra. You can actually find mindfulness walking down the street. And as you said, find the hope, find the little things on a walk while you're cooking, just to be present, because I think we're so distracted. And starting there is a good place to start. It doesn't have to be so scripted.
Well, when I learned meditation, we did walking meditation. We learned meditation when we were doing the dishes. Now, meditation is simple. It's just focusing on one simple thing. And you can do it when you're talking to somebody because you're focusing on them, not you. You can do it when you're challenging yourself in a scary thing. Like I love skiing, and last year I went to Canada and I said I may never get back there, so I'm skiing off the top of Whistler and Blackcomb, and I get up there on the chairlift, and like there's a section there where you're 200 meters in the air and you're hanging off a little wire in the sky, and let me tell you, I had some scary thoughts then. But then when I got to the top, I said, okay, there's only one way down. Let's focus. Focus on your turns. If you focus on your turns, you will be fine. Don't worry about anything else. And so in a way, that's a meditation practice, because I stopped thinking about falling headlong down a, 300 or 400 meter slope that's full of bumps. I stopped focusing on the things that made me unable to perform, and skied down. And it was really lovely because I was just in the zone. And I'd never done it before, and it was terrifying in a way at the top of the mountain, because it is really steep and it is really a long way down. Yeah, so you can find meditative practices and uses for meditation and mindfulness in everything you do. Do we have any questions coming in?
We don't. We just have a lot of thank yous. So thank you for your advice. Thank you so much. Thank you. Extremely. Thank you, Jim, Deandra, and to the organizers of the webinar. Great presentation and very informative.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Deandra, for letting me have your people. And thank you guys for paying attention. I really hope it was really good for you and you got some great ideas out of it.
Thanks so much. We'll send out an email shortly after this with the link to the video for everyone and the link to Jim's website so you can download the slides. All right, everyone.
All right. Thanks, guys. Take care.
Great Saturday, everyone. Chat soon.